Your brain under pressure. Why smart people make dumb choices. The storm inside the cockpit. Most people have a private shame they carry like a small stone in their pocket. It is not always about something dramatic. Often it is about something ordinary. A choice they made that did not match who they believe they are. The text they sent. The bill they avoided. The promise they broke. The conversation they escalated. The purchase they did not need. The decision they rushed. The way they snapped at someone they love, then spent the rest of the day replaying it. What makes it painful is not only the consequence, it is the confusion. That is not me, we tell ourselves. I am smarter than this. We look at the pattern and think we must be lacking character, discipline, or integrity. We assume a better person would have handled it better. And because the mind dislikes mystery, it reaches for a simple conclusion. Something is wrong with me. This chapter offers a different conclusion, one that is both more compassionate and more true. Many of the dumb choices people make are not proof of weak character. They are proof of a brain doing exactly what it was built to do under pressure. In other words, what you call moral failure is often biology. That does not let you off the hook. It gives you the real hook. You cannot change what you misunderstand. If you keep treating stress-driven behavior as a personality defect, you will try to fix it with shame and force. But shame and force are pressure. They keep the nervous system in the same state that produced the behavior in the first place. You end up fighting fire with fire. You end up trying to think your way out of a state that is, by nature, not built for clear thinking. So we begin with a simple image. Picture your brain as a pilot flying a plane. In calm weather, the pilot can check the gauges, plan the route, talk with the co-pilot, and consider alternate landing options. In calm weather, the pilot can think. Now imagine a sudden storm. The plane jolts, visibility drops, noise increases. The pilot's body tightens. The pilot stops chatting and starts gripping the controls. The pilot focuses on the horizon line and the immediate instruments needed to keep the plane level. In that moment, the pilot may neglect the long-range plan, not because the pilot is incompetent, but because the storm makes right now the priority. If the plane does not stay level, there is no later. That is what stress does to cognition. It is a storm inside the cockpit. It narrows attention, shrinks time horizons, and rewards choices that bring immediate relief. It pushes you away from the kind of thinking that loves nuance and toward the kind of thinking that wants certainty. It changes the rules in the middle of the game. The most important spiritual undertone in this chapter is not mystical. It is moral in the best sense. It is the stance of mercy. Not the mercy that excuses, but the mercy that sees clearly. When you understand how stress changes the brain, you stop making your nervous system a villain. You stop treating your own humanity as an enemy. You begin to relate to yourself as a living system, not a broken machine. And that shift, quietly, is the beginning of transformation. The spotlight effect, how stress compresses perception. When people say stress makes them lose perspective, they are describing a real cognitive shift. Under pressure, the mind does not process the world the same way. It does not widen and wonder. It focuses. It locks in. It tunnels. Sendil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir describe this phenomenon in Scarcity with the metaphor of tunneling, like a spotlight that becomes so bright on one urgent concern that everything else disappears into darkness. When a person feels scarcity, whether it is a shortage of money, time, energy, or social safety, the brain allocates attention to the most pressing need. That is not a defect. It is an adaptation. In a world where survival depended on catching food, avoiding predators, or responding to immediate danger, tunneling increased the odds of making it through the day. The problem is that modern life triggers the same mechanism for problems that require long-range thinking. A financial shortfall is not solved by panic. A relationship rupture is not healed by urgency. A health habit is not built by self-attack. Yet the nervous system reads these stressors as threats. Attention narrows anyway. In that narrowed state, you may become obsessively focused on one detail of a conversation and miss the broader context. You may become fixated on a bill and forget that you have options. You may become consumed by one social cue, one news headline, one frightening possibility, and lose access to everything else you know. That is why stress feels like shrinking. Your world becomes smaller. Your mind becomes less able to hold multiple truths at once. This is also why stress often accelerates certainty. When attention narrows, ambiguity becomes harder to tolerate. The brain wants a clean story. It wants to know who is right, what is wrong, and what must be done. Under threat, complexity feels dangerous. Certainty feels like safety. Daniel Kahneman explains in Thinking, Fast and Slow that the mind has different modes of processing. One is fast, intuitive, and automatic. The other is slower, more deliberative, and more effortful. Under normal conditions, we move between them. Under stress, the fast system takes over more completely because it is efficient and immediate. The mind begins to favor quick judgments and familiar scripts. It is not that the slow system disappears. It is that it becomes harder to access, like a library in a building whose power has flickered. The books are still there, but the lights are dim. This is a crucial point for anyone who has ever asked, "Why did I do that?" The answer is often, because the part of you that sees options was temporarily offline. Not offline forever, not broken, just overridden by an older, faster program designed to keep you alive. Stress also changes what you notice. It biases perception toward threat. Neutral signals can start to feel loaded. A short reply looks like rejection. A delayed response looks like abandonment. A passing comment looks like a verdict. The mind becomes a vigilant interpreter, scanning for danger. And in that scanning, it often finds what it fears. Lisa Feldman Barrett offers a helpful way to think about this in How Emotions Are Made. She describes the brain as a prediction machine, constantly forecasting what is happening and what it should do next, based on past experience. Under stress, those predictions can become louder and less flexible. If your system is already braced, it is more likely to predict threat. It is more likely to interpret uncertainty as danger. It is more likely to build an emotional experience that fits the body's state. Barrett's larger point is that emotions are not simply reactions that happen to you. They are experiences your brain constructs as it tries to make sense of bodily signals and environmental cues. In calm states, the brain has more room to update its predictions. In stressed states, the brain tends to cling to its predictions because updating costs energy. The brain becomes less curious and more convinced, so stress compresses perception. It turns the wide-angle lens into a zoom lens. It makes you more likely to miss the bigger picture, not because you lack intelligence, but because your system is prioritizing the right now problem. This is where compassion becomes practical. If you want better decisions, you do not start by demanding better decisions from a brain in a storm. You start by learning how to reduce the storm, or at least how to keep enough steadiness inside it that you can still steer. The bandwidth tax. Why stress makes thinking harder. People often describe stress as mental fog, brain freeze, or "I can't think." These are not poetic complaints. They are accurate descriptions of cognitive resources being consumed. Mullainathan and Shafir use the phrase bandwidth tax in scarcity to explain what pressure does to the mind. Imagine your brain as a computer. In calm conditions, you have enough processing power to run multiple programs at once. You can keep track of tasks, plan ahead, remember details, and consider consequences. But when scarcity or stress hits, it is as if a heavy program starts running in the background, taking up memory and processing speed. The computer still works, but everything slows down. Small tasks feel harder, decisions feel heavier, mistakes become more likely. Working memory is a big part of this. Working memory is the mind's mental workspace, the ability to hold information in mind and manipulate it. It is what lets you compare options, remember what you meant to do, and keep a plan steady while you take steps toward it. Under stress, working memory tends to degrade. The system is using resources elsewhere. It is spending attention on threat, on scanning, on rehearsing, on bracing. The workspace gets crowded. Robert Sapolsky explains in Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers that stress hormones like cortisol are part of a system designed to mobilize energy for immediate action. In short bursts, that is useful. But when the stress response is activated repeatedly, the ongoing hormonal and physiological strain can interfere with higher cognitive functions. You may feel jumpy, scattered, and less able to think through complex tasks. You may become less cognitively flexible, meaning you have a harder time shifting perspectives or imagining alternatives. You may become more rigid because rigidity costs less energy than adaptability. This is why stress can make even simple tasks feel complicated. When your bandwidth is taxed, you start to make small errors that have outsized consequences. You forget passwords, you misplace items, you miss appointments, you answer the wrong email, you underestimate time. Then, because you are already stressed, those mistakes become proof that you are failing, which adds more stress, which taxes bandwidth further. The loop tightens. This also explains a painful human pattern. When people are depleted, they often default to the easiest option, not the best one. When your system is tired, hungry, overloaded, or emotionally strained, you become more likely to choose whatever requires the least effort in the moment. That can look like procrastination, avoidance, or defaulting to old habits. It can look like saying yes when you mean no. It can look like settling for whatever brings immediate relief. The point is not that you are doomed to make these choices. The point is that choice quality is state-dependent. If you want reliable follow-through, you have to account for the state of the system doing the following through. This is also why the world can feel harsher under stress. When bandwidth is taxed, you have less emotional capacity. Your patience shrinks. Your tolerance for ambiguity shrinks. Your ability to stay kind shrinks. Under pressure, even small stresses can feel like insults. This is not because you have become a worse person. It is because your internal resources are low, and low resources make the nervous system more reactive. This is an important cultural parallel, because many spiritual traditions have long warned against judging yourself in states of agitation. In Buddhist language, the mind under stress is like muddy water. If you stir it, it becomes murkier. If you let it settle, clarity returns. The wisdom is not in forcing clarity. The wisdom is in creating conditions for settling. You do not have to adopt any particular religion to see the truth in that image. The modern brain under pressure is a stirred-up system. It cannot easily access its best thinking. The spiritual stance is to stop stirring, and the scientific stance is to reduce load. Both point to the same practical reality. Regulation restores bandwidth. When you are regulated, the mind has more workspace. It can hold consequences. It can imagine alternatives. It can remember values. It can tolerate discomfort long enough to choose what matters. That is why regulated people appear wise. They are not necessarily wiser. They are simply less cognitively taxed. in the moment of choice. The short-term relief trap, impulsivity as a survival strategy. If stress narrows attention and taxes bandwidth, it also does something else that matters deeply for money, health, and relationships. It increases impulsivity. Impulsivity is often treated as a moral weakness. People speak about it as if it is a lack of character. I have no self-control. But under pressure, impulsivity is often a survival strategy. The brain starts favoring what works quickly because it has learned that quick is safer than slow. When the system is threatened, the brain relies more heavily on automatic pathways. It becomes more driven by emotion, habit, and immediate reward. It is not that the rational brain disappears, but the balance shifts. The prefrontal cortex, often described as the part of the brain involved in planning, inhibition, and complex decision-making, becomes less effective under high stress. Meanwhile, more reactive systems become louder. The mind begins to privilege whatever reduces discomfort now. This is why stress is so strongly linked to what people call bad habits. Under stress, the mind wants relief. It wants comfort. It wants certainty. It wants escape. It wants something to take the edge off. For some people, that is food. For some, it is scrolling. For some, it is shopping. For some, it is alcohol. For some, it is workaholism. For some, it is picking fights because anger discharges energy. For some, it is withdrawal because shutting down lowers stimulation. Different nervous systems choose different relief strategies, but the pattern is similar. The brain is not asking, "What will help me in 6 months?" It is asking, "What will calm me down in 6 minutes?" This creates what we might call the short-term relief trap. You do something that provides a small hit of relief. The nervous system learns that the behavior works. It reinforces it. Then, when stress rises again, the behavior becomes more likely. Over time, you do not simply have stress. You have a stress relief loop. This is one reason people often feel confused by their own behavior. They believe they are making free choices, but under pressure, they are often repeating learned relief patterns. The pattern may be costly, but it is familiar, and familiarity feels safe to a threatened brain. This also clarifies why shame is such a poor motivator. Shame adds threat. It increases pressure. It makes the nervous system more likely to seek relief. So a person feels ashamed about impulsive spending, then feels stressed, then spends again to reduce the stress, then feels more ashamed. The loop becomes a cage. Again, this is where compassion is not sentimental. It is strategic. If you want to help yourself make better choices, you do not begin by calling yourself weak. You begin by asking, "What need was I trying to meet?" Sometimes the need is comfort. Sometimes it is certainty. Sometimes it is relief. Sometimes it is a sense of control. Sometimes it is belonging. If you can identify the need, you can begin to meet it in a healthier way. If you cannot identify the need, you will keep chasing it through whatever habit has been reinforced. Stress also creates what researchers sometimes describe as myopia for the future. In plain language, it makes the future feel less real. When you are in a threat state, the body is oriented toward immediate survival, not long-range flourishing. The future becomes an abstraction. You may understand consequences intellectually, but they do not land emotionally. They do not feel compelling enough to compete with the urgent present. This is why just think about the future rarely works when someone is stressed. The mind cannot feel the future strongly enough to organize behavior around it. It needs something closer. It needs a bridge. It needs a way to make long-term outcomes emotionally relevant in the present. This is where the calm advantage becomes deeply practical. Calm increases your ability to feel the future, not as fantasy, but as consequence. Calm allows the brain to hold long-term outcomes in mind. Calm makes delayed rewards more meaningful. Calm makes patience possible. That does not mean calm removes desire. It means calm gives desire a wiser container. It gives you enough steadiness to tolerate discomfort for the sake of something that matters. The spiritual undertone here is about freedom. Many traditions describe freedom not as the ability to do whatever you want, but as the ability to not be owned by impulse. Freedom is the ability to choose what aligns with your values, even when your body is activated. Freedom is the ability to say, I feel the urge, and I am not required to obey it. That is not suppression. It is sovereignty. It is the calm advantage in its most human form. From moral failure to mechanical truth, a new kind of responsibility. It might sound like this chapter is trying to absolve people of responsibility. It is not. It is trying to relocate responsibility into the real world, where it can actually function. When we label stress-driven behavior as moral failure, we tend to respond with harshness. Harshness can sometimes produce short bursts of change, but it rarely produces lasting transformation. It often produces hiding, denial, and rebound behavior. Harshness also makes it harder to learn, because learning requires curiosity, and curiosity does not thrive under threat. A more honest approach is to say, my brain under pressure works differently. If I want better choices, I need better conditions. That is not blame shifting. That is reality respecting. This is where it helps to understand the difference between fault and responsibility. Many people were trained to confuse the two. Fault is about assigning shame. Responsibility is about taking ownership of what you can influence. Fault says, you are bad. Responsibility says, this is happening, and I can learn how to work with it. Once you understand how stress shapes cognition, you can become responsible in a new way. You stop demanding perfection. You start designing support. You stop expecting willpower to carry you through every storm. You start building skills and structures that reduce storms and increase your ability to steer. This is also where cultural parallels deepen the message. In many wisdom traditions, the first movement toward change is not self-attack. It is awareness. It is seeing clearly. In contemplative language, you might call it witnessing. In psychological language, you might call it metacognition, the ability to observe your own mind. Either way, it is the same shift. You step back enough to notice what is happening inside you. When you can notice stress compressing perception, you can say, I am in a tunnel. When you can notice bandwidth tax, you can say, my workspace is crowded. When you can notice impulsive relief seeking, you can say, my body wants comfort. These statements might sound simple, but they are powerful because they interrupt identification. They separate you from the storm without denying the storm. Lisa Feldman Barrett's work supports this in a practical way because it suggests that naming and understanding your internal signals can change the emotional experience you construct. If you can distinguish between I am unsafe and I am activated, you give your brain more data. If you can say this is stress instead of this is doom, you widen the meaning. You create room for different action. This is also consistent with James Gross's process model of emotion regulation, because it emphasizes that regulation is not one thing you do after you are overwhelmed. It includes what you do before, during, and after emotional activation. It includes how you choose situations, how you interpret them, and how you respond. So what does it look like to put this into everyday life without becoming overly technical? It looks like recognizing that your smartest self is not always available on demand. Just as you would not expect yourself to do your best math while being shaken awake, You cannot expect yourself to do your best relational work while flooded with threat. That is not a moral statement, it is a design problem. It looks like learning the early signs of narrowing attention, so you can pause sooner. It looks like reducing the background applications that drain bandwidth, such as constant news exposure, unstructured obligations, and unresolved stress loops. It looks like building small, reliable practices that help your nervous system return to steadiness, so you do not live at the edge of overload. It looks like making fewer high-stakes decisions when you are hungry, exhausted, or emotionally charged. It looks like creating default choices in money and health that reduce the need for constant willpower. All of this will be explored later in the book. For now, the key is to accept the premise. Stress changes the brain's operating system. Once you accept that, you stop being surprised by your own humanity. You stop being crushed by your own inconsistency. You start becoming a person who works with reality instead of fighting it. This is the calm advantage. It is not being calm all the time. It is being able to return to the state where your best thinking is available. It is being able to widen your perception when it narrows. It is being able to slow down certainty when it accelerates. It is being able to choose long-term outcomes over short-term relief, not because you are a saint, but because you have built a steadier system. And perhaps most importantly, it is being able to treat yourself as someone worth helping, not someone who needs to be punished into improvement.